Creating any film is a fine balance between art and commerce. Art is why film continues to exist at all, yet commerce is what drives studios to invest millions of dollars in funding their creation. For a business like the Walt Disney Company, the push and pull between art and commerce has defined countless films, with creative expression and the bottom dollar each influencing decades of work. And in this day and age, it can seem impossible to imagine a time when pure artistic expression was the driving motivator of a film. Profits be damned. But it was the drive to create something artistically powerful and trailblazing that led to the creation of 1940's Fantasia, a 2-hour-long anthology of wordless animated vignettes each interpreting a piece of classical music. While Fantasia was received and promoted unlike any Disney animated feature film before or since, its underperformance and the onset of World War II was one of Walt Disney's rare failures. Yet its enduring popularity would lead to Disney revisiting Fantasia at the turn of the century for another artistic experiment. Both Fantasia and Fantasia 2000 are outliers within the larger scheme of Disney animation, at once figures of pure artistic expression, but also seemingly impenetrable experiments to mainstream audiences. And yet their influence on both Disney and entertainment as a whole has endured for decades. From its attempts at translating classical art for a modern audience, to its ambitious, ever-updating presentation that was scrapped soon after release, Fantasia stands as maybe the ultimate example of Disney, both the man and the company, and its constant battle to prove animation as a dignified medium and grow as a dominant corporation, no matter how at odds these two ambitions are with one another. This is Fantasia, Walt Disney's high art failure. The Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio was founded by Walt and Roy Disney in 1923, creating dozens of cartoon shorts and eventually being renamed as Walt Disney Productions by the time they created Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 1937, the first ever feature-length animated film. And as feature-length films skyrocketed Disney to massive success, the studio brought their major animated short series, Silly Symphonies, to a close in 1939 after 75 productions. One of the last of these would be The Sorcerer's Apprentice starring Mickey Mouse, at first conceived of in 1936 by Walt. The production of the cartoon, however, soon ballooned far past expectations, costing $125,000, at least 3 times as much as the typical Silly Symphony, and facing an impossible task of making its budget back. With The Sorcerer's Apprentice largely done, Disney decided to expand their efforts to a feature film anthology, initially titled The Concert Feature, that's a little obvious, and eventually retitled Fantasia, much more evocative, taking various pieces of classical music as inspiration for a cornucopia of incredible imagination. In regards to the major chance they were taking, which was ultimately met with a weak reception on initial release, Walt Disney said, "The public would always recognize and appreciate quality. It was this faith in the discrimination of the average person that led us to make such a radically different type of entertainment as Fantasia. We simply figured that if ordinary folk like ourselves could find entertainment in these visualizations of so-called classical music, so would the average audience." Sonically, capturing the sound of a full orchestra for an experience that was as close to a live concert as possible was a challenge for the Disney team. To achieve the experience, each section of conductor Leopold Stokowski's orchestra was recorded live separately via 9 different microphones, with the recorded sound played in the theater from 3 separate sound channels, played from speakers placed around the theater. The idea was to replicate the experience of each unique instrument being played and mixing within the air around the audience. There are 8 different segments within Fantasia, each set to music mostly played by the Philadelphia Orchestra and all conducted by Stokowski, who had originally conducted the music for The Sorcerer's Apprentice for free. These segments are brought to life by 12 different directors, under the production supervision of Ben Sharpstein, and story direction by Joe Grant and Dick Humer, and each introduced by Deems Taylor as a master of ceremonies, providing context and structure for the music ahead. Taylor, a conductor and music critic, also helped to select the pieces for the film along with Walt and a small group during a 3-week conference, listening to hundreds of pieces of music to make their choice. Toccata and Fugue in D minor by Johann Sebastian Bach, directed by Samuel Armstrong, is our introduction to the concert, and acts as a sort of segue to the images to come, as almost the entirety of the segment is composed of abstract visuals, more of a translation of the feeling of the music than a narrative. "You will be able to see the music and hear the picture," said Walt Disney. And this first piece is an expression of that intent. The segment was originally overseen by Oskar Fischinger, who had helped pioneer abstract animation in Germany before fleeing from the Nazis. Fischinger's abstract approach is vital to the interpretation of ideas and mood through color and movement. However, Disney altered his ideas in the animation process, and Fischinger, who largely disliked working within a larger studio, quit the film and demanded his name be removed from the credits. As something to make the audience comfortable with the art to come, I think that the Toccata and Fugue section is beautiful to look at, but easy to forget. There are no tangible ideas to grasp onto. Today, something like this wouldn't be necessary, as I think that general audiences pick up on the concept quickly, and really it probably wasn't necessary in 1940 either. Next is The Nutcracker Suite by Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky, also directed by Samuel Armstrong. Of course, Tchaikovsky's suite is most closely associated with Christmas, but the excerpt used here inspired scenes of magical creatures in nature as the seasons change. A preoccupation with the changing of the seasons and contemplation regarding the shifting beauty of nature defines much of Disney's early animation, seen earlier in several silly symphonies and later in Bambi. Given that there is no preordained story dictating what should be shown on screen in any of these segments, every little detail of every segment was litigated over and over again, with the music being recorded first and then the images being storyboarded second. I find that the delicate character work here is most closely related to the many silly symphonies that came before, creating a classical ballet translated through a heightened world. Given that the nature fantasy of the Nutcracker Suite animated here is the most classical of any segment, with no real twist on the genre, just finely detailed creatures, it doesn't really stand out in the memory beyond this fish giving me the eye. The Sorcerer's Apprentice by Paul Dukas, directed by James Alger, is the segment that started it all. And given that it stars Mickey Mouse, it's the one section that features something lacking in almost every other piece. A recognizable character that audiences can latch onto when complete lack of dialogue or sound effects means connection to the story being told is entirely dependent on physical expression. The Sorcerer's Apprentice has transcended Fantasia and become a piece of Disney iconography. Given that the scherzo it's using is a musical retelling of an existing story, the poem Der Zauberlehrling by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, it already has a much stronger narrative than anything else here, heightened by the fact that this animation was originally meant to stand on its own as a short. With Mickey at the center, a student of magic soon in over his head as his magically multiplying brooms cause havoc, the Sorcerer's Apprentice is a wonderful piece of comedic escalation, providing visual gags that harmonize well with the alternatingly bombastic and playful orchestration. Appropriate for the somewhat pejorative term Mickey Mousing, every beat of Stokowski's music is accompanied by a step or crash or shock on screen. In every classic short, Mickey is the ultimate man of action, a hero that's constantly on the attack but also in over his head. For years, Mickey has been dismissed as simply a corporate logo. But these early shorts, including Sorcerer's Apprentice and the newer, absolutely insane Wonderful World of Mickey Mouse cartoons, show a dynamic, exciting character that can easily connect with audiences, without a word. The result is that The Sorcerer's Apprentice has achieved mainstream public consciousness, with only one other segment finding a similar level of mainstream renown. Next is Rite of Spring by Igor Stravinsky, directed by Bill Roberts and Paul Satterfield, which chronicles the beginnings of life on Earth, embracing a scientific focus on evolution that contrasts against the fantasy of the surrounding film. Here, Wright's animation is composed of 8 sections, at first moving through space until we reach Earth, and then tracking the spark of life. The bulk of the segment is the life and death of the dinosaurs, and I think it's an absolutely incredible piece of animation, showcasing this dangerous yet beautiful prehistoric kingdom. The overall theme is the inevitability of death to make way for new life, as both a fight between a T-Rex and a Stegosaurus and the slow starvation of the dinosaurs depict the doom of animals beyond our imagination. This segment in particular has clearly had an influence on decades of on-screen depictions of the dinosaur, with everything from Don Bluth's Land Before Time to Jurassic Park and Jurassic World owing the basis of their depictions of these creatures to the work done here. Walt had been intent on featuring prehistoric life in a Fantasia segment, and hearing Rite of Spring immediately linked up with the ideas swirling around in his head. Stokowski was an early champion of Stravinsky's ballet, which was extremely controversial when it first debuted. I think you can bring this music to the consciousness of people, so they will see how great it really is, said Stokowski. At present, they are trying to down it. The men who are not creators sneer at it. It was Stokowski who conducted Rite of Spring for the first time in America, so getting the piece in Fantasia must have been a huge win for the conductor. Stravinsky reportedly hated it. A 15-minute intermission follows, with the picture picking back up with another impressionistic segment, Meet the Soundtrack, directed by David Hand and Ben Sharpstein. With a jam session instead of a classical arrangement, it's an extrapolation of the soundtrack found on film strips accompanying the image. It's not an exact replication, but more of a caricature of what sound looks like when recorded. Here, it's like Disney is giving the soundtrack its time in the spotlight, putting the shy but proud wavelength in front of everyone to see. Next comes the Pastoral Symphony by Ludwig van Beethoven, directed by Ford Beebe Jr., Jim Handley, and Hamilton Luske. And with its 5 movements, Disney's animated interpretation moves through Greek myth, this time taking on a much more cartoony approach than the more austere creatures of the Nutcracker suite. However, this is the only section of the film to have undergone a major overhaul mid-production, as this was originally set to be scored by Gabriel Piernet's Cydalise et Chèvrepied, with Walt and company already having decided on this section using Greek mythology for visuals. However, Walt was dissatisfied with how Cydalise was accompanying the animation, leading to the Pastoral Symphony being subbed in with the visuals already defined, the opposite of every other segment. It was the influence of animator Freddie Moore here, who also redesigned Mickey Mouse for Sorcerer's Apprentice, brought to an end the era of Pie-Eyed Mickey, and who supervised the dwarves of Snow White as well as various characters in Pinocchio, Dumbo, and Cinderella, who brought a wide-eyed squash and stretch approach that made sure what could have easily been a repeat of Nutcracker was its own. At the time, the compilation of Beethoven's symphony with an almost parodic approach to myth was controversial. Today, it's a bit lost in the shuffle of several standout segments in the back half, but the Greek myth visuals here would inspire a legion of future film interpretations, including Disney's own Hercules, with gods that take on a very similar statuesque outline, and Ray Harryhausen's Clash of the Titans and its Pegasus. Dance of the Hours by Amilcare Ponchielli, directed by Norman Ferguson and T. He, quickly sprang from the imagination of Walt Disney, who, according to stenographer notes, came up with the premise of animals performing a ballet and slowly descending into chaos, with its comedic moments acted out by Walt for the team. What I really love about the Dance of the Hours segment is that by using hippos, alligators, and elephants, the animation team is turning their ballet into almost a full-on parody, although still played with a completely straight face. The juxtaposition of these completely physically unlikely animals performing choreographed dance draws attention to the artifice of the entire production. This is a performance instead of the beautiful natural wonder that plays out in previous segments. And the struggle of these animals to actually pull off the moves highlights it even further. Ballet, of course, is an abstraction in the way of movement, of storytelling, said T. He. If you just take it a little bit further, it becomes satire. And this segment is a fantastic encapsulation of animation's ability to caricature real life, exaggerating both movement and personalities in ways that, no matter how strange and silly they become, reflect something of reality, making us recognize similar traits and struggles in ourselves, and being comfortable to laugh at what we would otherwise take far too seriously. And the final segment is a combination of Night on Bald Mountain by Modest Mussorgsky and Ave Maria by Franz Schubert, directed by Wilfred Jackson, contrasting these two extremely different pieces of music with animation that depicts the demonic nighttime celebration of Chernobog and his army of demons, with the breaking of the dawn and a morning procession of worshippers. It's a mixture of Slavic myth and Christianity, creating an image of massive evil with the support of supervising animator Vladimir Titov. Hitler. To bring Chernobog to life, the studio used both live-action reference and 3D models, and the result is a massive demon that recalls a gargoyle and legions of evil that skirt the line between human, animal, and spirit. It's such a massive display of triumphant evil that few other Disney creations match its horror run rampant. But it's also the natural endpoint of the original Silly Symphony, the skeleton dance. I'm sure I'm not alone in being terrified of Night on Bald Mountain as a kid, but what really completes the piece is the simplicity of how evil is driven back. The ringing of a church bell and the coming of the dawn. No great battle, just light and good reasserting themselves. Night on Bald Mountain is filled with hyper-detailed, constantly moving characters that showcase the wide array of emotions possible in animation. Ave Maria is still and more reliant on camera moves and angles, capturing soft backgrounds through the ever-searching eye of the Disney multiplane camera. It's a beautiful, peaceful, graceful ending to the many different colored emotions that have defined the film in the previous 2 hours. A moment of reflection and calm, underlining the belief that good will win out in the end. Like its creation, the distribution of Fantasia was also completely unconventional. At this point, RKO Radio Pictures was the exclusive distributor for Disney's films, but lacked confidence in Fantasia's ability to draw an audience. Disney would strike a deal with RKO to distribute the film in a roadshow format, taking it on a tour across 13 locations, including a year at New York's Broadway Theater. At each of these locations, Disney installed dimensional sound systems to create stereophonic sound they called Fantasound, as well as special lighting and curtain controls, costing $30,000 per theater. However, the continued spread of World War II in Europe meant Fantasia was unable to be shown internationally, and the US's entry into war 1 year later scuttled any further plans for the roadshow. Fantasia was a costly endeavor for Disney, ending with a budget of $2.28 million, not including the cost of setting up Fantasound or leasing various theaters. But the movie would only make $1.3 million in its initial release. And while Fantasia was heralded by critics, it simply didn't have the time or attention needed to connect with audiences. Disney's plan to continually update the film, swapping out segments for an always shifting movie, was scrapped, despite beginning to consider how to adapt Peter and the Wolf, The Ride of the Valkyries, The Swan of Tuonela, The Flight of the Bumblebee, and Clair de Lune. Disney would soon enter into its wartime era, an overlooked period during World War II defined by short films, small budgets, and the studio trying to both stay afloat and support US war efforts with their animation. That's a story for another time, but what it meant was that the high art experimentation of Fantasia was quickly moved away from. As time passed, Disney would re-release Fantasia into theaters through several different models, trying to keep the film alive in the public consciousness before the arrival of home video, and slowly turning a profit. RKO chopped the hell out of Fantasia, cutting down the 2-hour movie to 1 hour 20 minutes with mono sound, and attached to a double feature in the hopes of making money off it, without the costly showcase Walt had wanted. Fantasia was re-released in 1956 using 4-track magnetic film instead of the costly Fantasound, which finally helped turn a profit. And in 1969, Fantasia was re-released and caught the wave of hippie psychedelia, earning a reputation as a cult classic within the ever-growing Disney oeuvre. In 1981, Fantasia's score was re-recorded under conductor Erwin Kostal for the first ever digitally recorded motion picture soundtrack. Despite the film never reaching the mainstream appeal of many other Disney classics, Fantasia was cared for by both Walt and the many creators that walked in his footsteps. Eventually, the continued focus on Fantasia would lead to a new iteration. In the midst of Michael Eisner's takeover of Disney in the 80s, Roy E. Disney suggested creating a Fantasia sequel. And while the idea was put on the back burner, the restoration and re-release of Fantasia to theaters scored $25 million, while its first ever home video release received more than 9 million pre-orders. Fantasia was finally a bona fide hit, and Eisner greenlighted a sequel in 1991. The studio would search for a way forward for the rest of the decade as movie after movie brought new levels of success to the Disney Renaissance. The film, at first titled Fantasia Continued, was retitled Fantasia 2000, as delays pushed it closer and closer to the new millennium. But if it was good enough for Gerard Butler's Dracula, it was good enough for Mickey Mouse, dang it. Fantasia 2000 has 8 directors under producers Roy E. Disney and Donald W. Ernst, with conductor James Levine and the Chicago Symphony Orchestra providing the music. And instead of a single master of ceremonies, each segment features a new host, all famous celebrities, adding some star power in the hopes of overcoming what I can only assume is Disney feeling like the anonymity of the original was out of step, and part of its inability to originally connect with audiences. With 8 segments, however, it only runs 75 minutes including credits, making it a much more slight film, with each segment a far less epic, fully formed piece. And while Fantasia 2000 was made with the intention of being an organic continuation of the original, almost all of its segments feel like they're in conversation with another piece of the 1940 film, making it much less of a standalone and more like bonus content. The film opens with Symphony No. 5 by Ludwig van Beethoven, directed by Picochet Hunt, transitioning from an extravagant set modified with CGI to another free-form abstract interpretation of music, just like Toccata and Fugue. It's also a declaration of how heavily CGI will factor into the film in the wake of Pixar trailblazing the format for Disney, with this not just using the CAP system, but Hunt also using Houdini animation software for what is, I'm sorry, a very cool screensaver. Next is Pines of Rome by Ottorino Respighi, directed by Handel Butoy and featuring a massive pod of whales flying through the air. With the segment beginning development in 1993, this whale tale showcases Disney's continued evolution in the use of CGI, with the eyes of each creature hand-drawn when their computer capabilities couldn't handle it. Now, I'm all in favor of nature conservation, but I would absolutely nuke these whales. It's a gentle segment that was most heavily used to promote the film due to its early development. Rhapsody in Blue by George Gershwin, directed by Eric Goldberg, is easily one of the greatest pieces of animation I've seen in my entire life. It's such a spectacular piece that it easily justifies watching this entire film, with the team using Al Hirschfeld's approach to caricatures as the basis for a bustling New York City filled with stories of people wishing for a different life. And with Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue not just scoring the comedic frenzy, but also coming to life in the line work, it's a spectacle of feeling brought to life in every animation choice on screen. And while this is a hand-drawn segment, the colors were done digitally, providing a flatness that echoes Walt Paraguay's colors for 101 Dalmatians. It feels incredibly alive and daring, something that doesn't necessarily seem like a Disney cartoon, but whose ambition and scope could only be possible with the studio's backing. Nothing else in 2000 comes close to the heights achieved here in Rhapsody in Blue, a truly modern American masterpiece of animation, matching an American masterpiece of jazz composition. Piano Concerto No. 2, Allegro, Opus 102 by Dmitri Shostakovich, directed by Handel Butoy, adapts the story of The Steadfast Tin Soldier by Hans Christian Andersen. Overall, I think it's the weakest piece of either film, feeling more like a Toy Story knockoff that can't live up to Pixar's work in the art form. And while creepy at times, it gives a happy ending in place of the original's tragedy. It's extremely of the era, getting major Anastasia vibes here, and a sign of Disney's struggles to come post-Renaissance, as the studio began to feel more and more like its identity-less competitors. The Carnival of the Animals finale by Camille Saint-Saëns, directed by Eric Goldberg, is a brief comedic interlude focused on a flamingo playing with a yo-yo. It's obviously this film's Meet the Soundtrack, without the need for an actual intermission, while also echoing the animal silliness of Dance of the Hours. I wish this was longer and more complex, as the colors and expressions here are much more fun than a lot of the CGI dullness that surrounds it. Next, The Sorcerer's Apprentice returns here in the spirit of the original intention of continual updates. Of course, it's one of the strongest segments in both movies, and given its mainstream renown, it's not surprising that it's included. But since this film is so short, I wish something new was here. This is all the more confusing because next is Pomp and Circumstance by Sir Edward Elgar, directed by Francis Glebus, an obvious attempt to give this film its own Sorcerer's Apprentice, as Donald Duck is placed square in the middle of Noah's Ark. I think this is a really fun segment, mostly because I love Donald, but it is strange seeing the duck's antics without his trademark noises. With a massive scale, this almost feels like the opening of The Lion King, just with added comedy. I think this one is a little unfairly forgotten, because it's essentially a classic Donald short with spectacular Disney Renaissance hand-drawn animation. And finally, we have Firebird Suite, 1919 version by Igor Stravinsky, directed by Gaten and Paul Brizzi. This film's Night on Bald Mountain, tracking a nature spirit and her elk friend, who accidentally wake up the spirit of a volcano. The push and pull between gentle nature and terrifying destruction is clearly meant to echo the evil of Chernobog and the peace of the worshippers in a similar bombastic end to the film. It's definitely one of the stronger segments here, and while Disney would create better CGI environments in the future, the animation of our three main creatures is filled with great emotion and expression. Like the original, Fantasia 2000 was a highly ambitious disappointment. This time, an $85 million budget netted only a $90 million box office, leading to Fantasia 3 plans being cancelled. And while Fantasia 2000 embodied Disney's high hopes of artistic praise that defined the early years of the Renaissance, the film marked the beginning of the company's post-Renaissance era, defined by struggling to meet critical and financial expectations. In the more than 2 decades since, Fantasia 2000 has largely been forgotten in reappraisals of the era, but the original Fantasia has left a lasting mark on both Disney and pop culture. Of course, it's The Sorcerer's Apprentice that's had the widest ranging influence, with everything from The Simpsons to a vaguely related live-action film translation starring Nick Cage using its iconography. But Mickey and the Sorcerer cap has taken on a life of its own. One of the many versions of the Disney mascot that immediately stands as an iteration more closely aligned with prestige within the company. After all, it's the Sorcerer's cap that stands outside the animation studios to recall Walt's ambition, and the image of a magical Mickey that was used to brand their home video classics. "I don't regret making it," said Walt about Fantasia years later. "It's what we should have been doing with our medium at the time." But Fantasia wouldn't see true success until decades after Walt's passing. The focus of both Fantasia and Fantasia 2000 on proving animation to be as worthy of praise as the classical music it accompanied feels further and further out of step with Disney's focus on mining IP and iterating on franchises. But who knows? Maybe Fantasia 2060 may find the company at another drastically different stage. Fantasia's underperformance yet air of prestige has always kept it on the outskirts of Disney fandom, but its reputation as high art within an increasingly cynically commercial company feels more special than ever. Thanks for watching today's video, and we're kicking off the year with a return to Disney. If you've been following the channel, then you know that I just love going back to a lot of the less popular and often failed aspects of Disney's productions. And Fantasia, and to a lesser extent Fantasia 2000, has been on my mind for quite a while. It's always been one of those oddball Disney productions, but it's also this incredible piece of high art that really shows the ambitions of Walt Disney and the Disney Corporation as a whole, especially when embracing the chance to do something that would be considered high art. Of course, its early failure and the general failure of Fantasia 2000 meant that it took a long time for these movies to be reclaimed and to be profitable. But I find that slow reappraisal and slow discovery are more interesting to me than something that is a mega hit right out the gate. And while the original Fantasia has a wonderful reputation, Fantasia 2000 has basically been lost to time. Although I think there are several segments in it that are really fantastic. And as I said, the Rhapsody in Blue piece is one of the greatest things I've ever seen in animation. It is truly special. And if this video inspires you to do anything, I hope that it inspires you to watch or rewatch that segment. Of course, segments like The Sorcerer's Apprentice and Night on Bald Mountain are classic pieces of animation now, and they truly do deserve their reputation. But I think that Fantasia overall deserves a little more praise, and at least a little more attention when talking about the Disney animated features of old. And it won't surprise you, but this is far from the last Disney video that I will be doing this year. And you can probably see a few that were hinted at in this video. I'd love to hear your thoughts on both Fantasias, as well as what you would say are the best segments in each, as well as whether you think a Fantasia 3 would ever be possible at Disney, even if it is years in the future. As always, a huge thank you to my patrons for their continued support. And if you'd like to be a patron, it's only $1 a month for early access to every video and exclusive Patreon-only reviews. So until next time, I hope that you're taking care of yourselves and enjoying a classic piece of animation.